Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and gittens, comic book fans all around the world. Welcome to another fabulous, mind-bending episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living, oddly enough, is I write comic books. So let's not waste one more second of your precious time. Brandon Woodall, he says, I understand that Superman and Batman will enter the public domain in 2034 and 2035, respectively. Well, this is a subject that's really fascinating you people. I've answered a lot of questions about this, but I'll answer more because it is fascinating. What I find puzzling is why their inspirations, Doc Savage and the Shadow, aren't on a similar timeline. Condé Nast holds the copyright and trademark for both characters and has periodically renewed them, yet it doesn't seem like they're actively using the properties. Aside from archived digital copies of the original stories online, there's been little sign of reprints of the like. Why is Condé Nast holding on so tightly to these characters if they're not doing anything with them? It feels like they're just sitting on the IPs with no plans in motion. Yeah, I mean, copyright, trademark, all these things, they're way above my pay grade. I hate that saying, but they are. I don't understand how they work. That's why you have copyright and trademark lawyers. And the difference between a copyright lawyer and a trademark lawyer is the difference between a Kia Sport and a Bentley. Apparently, because trademarking something costs a fortune. Now, your main question is one that frustrates the hell out of me, and I've found it frustrating personally, is they have these potentially valuable properties, and yet they hold on to them. I don't know if you listen to the radio in your car, but there's often ads for these this guy who's selling you old time radio shows. And he must be doing well because the ads have been running about a year now and they're still pretty frequent. And what he's done is he's struck licensing deals with the original copyright holders of the material so he can get at the master tapes. I like listening to old time radio. And sometimes over the years, it's been a bit of a trial because you're listening to basically fan recorded versions of the shows. But this guy went back and got the masters. So the sound quality is amazing because, it's the master tapes. And so this guy basically had to goose the copyright holders of these things to let them enter into a business agreement with him. They were perfectly content to just sit around doing nothing. Now, as far as I understand, we're going to involve lawyers again because a lot of times it's lawyers who are running these pools of licensed characters, and you have licensing houses that do nothing but buy up. I forget the name of the licensing house, but there's a licensing house for years, and they owned the images of the Three Stooges. They owned the images of Laurel and Hardy. So if you wanted to use those characters, you had to go through them to use those images in any form. And be it, photograph, film, cartoon versions of them, you weren't allowed to use their likenesses. And they pretty actively pursued trying to get those images out there, selling those images out there. And but outfits like Condé Nast and others just sort of they just sort of sit on the stuff. I mean, Doc Savage was a paperback phenom in the 60s. I mean, they sold a ton of these things, mostly to, adolescent boys, which, I assume Doc Savage was written for. And then in the 70s, or late 60s, early 70s, they began to publish other characters. So a lot of the pulp characters, G8 and his Battle Aces, I read a bunch of them, the Shadow, the Spider, the Avenger, all of those began appearing in new paperback editions with new covers and did well, right up to basically the end of the paperback era. So they were actively producing and getting them out there. But it's really, it is kind of frustrating because, even though these characters are long gone, I'm gonna make the case for the Shadow, because I think Doc Savage. I've never got Doc Savage. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it. I mean, I read some of them, and I didn't enjoy them. They're very formulaic, and I didn't find the character all that interesting. Even though you are right, he inspired characters like Superman and Batman. So, and, in my case, Bane. So, he, I get it, but I'm making an argument for the Shadow. Most people know something about the Shadow. The phrase "the Shadow knows" is like part of our language now, even for people who have no idea who the Shadow is. So the Shadow, Lamont Cranston and all that, continue to have interest. I mean, recently, James Patterson did his own version of the Shadow, which of course was awful, and totally missed the point. Shadow needs to be in period. Shadow needs to have the hat and a cowl and a scarf and all the rest of it. But for the Shadow, it seems to me like with crowdfunding and everything else, you couldn't mine those characters. You couldn't get those characters out there and raise some cash, raise some awareness of them. I know they made that, really, mediocre movie a few years ago. That didn't hit. And it just seems like after that, they just gave up. And you're right. There are outfits reprinting the Shadow, but you wouldn't know about that unless you looked for them. They're available digitally, but, there's no attempt to market them. Nobody's doing the heavy lifting of doing that. And like I said, I have some of my own personal experience with a lot of this, which I'll get to in a minute. But these are potentially valuable properties. Yeah, are they billion-dollar properties? No, but they certainly could be bringing in money. But like I said, the lawyers at Condé Nast overseeing these properties are probably overseeing 1,000 properties, and there are ones they want to push because they're easier to push, and ones they don't. And they're not really putting this stuff out there for anybody to request the use of these characters. And Condé Nast was a big publisher, and there's a lot more they own than the Shadow and Doc Savage. I mean, just magazine covers. You think they would market these? You think you would go to Bed Bath and Beyond and see these as like decorative items, kitschy, whatever. But you don't. I mean, you need, T-shirts, posters, waste paper baskets, so we can get these images out there. They're terrific. Now, like I said, a personal thing. I feel that the people running Edgar Rice Burroughs, his outfit, another outfit which managed to hold on to trademark and copyright to a great degree, although the early Tarzan novels are in public domain. I have my own dealings with them. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but for 7 years, Gary Quapis and I did a weekly Pellucidar comic strip. It was like a Sunday comic once a week. We never missed a week. I mean, this is over 350 strips and full color. I'll show you some in a minute. And the idea was we would do these. They weren't paying much. We would do these, and then they would be published in print form. I mean, you could see them digitally. You would subscribe on herb.com. You could read them digitally. But they promised that all of these would be printed. And they had Tarzan, John Carter, and Carson of Venus, all these regularly running strips. Not as regular as ours, or not as long as ours. I think Gary and I produce far more material for herb.com than any other creative team. But that's just the way we roll. But they promised that, and that's where the money was going to come in, the publication. We would get a piece of the sales. We would get royalties from the sales, and also, most important to me, have a book to hold in my hands. I'd say, I did this, I worked on this. I'm so proud. But they didn't. they didn't do anything with it for years and years and years and years. And I discussed in other videos how basically they kept saying they were waiting for Dark Horse to make up their mind. And this is like 11 years of waiting for Dark Horse to make up their mind. And I would always say, I think they did make up their mind. So in any case, I don't think they've been good stewards. Yeah, they keep the books in print. They've got some very handsome new hardcover editions, affordable hardcover editions of Tarzan. They just started doing John Carter. I hope they get to Pellucidar. I assume they're going to do all the rest with covers by Joe Jusko, which, if you're watching this, this is Joe doing Tarzan. And so they're doing that. And, you know, the last Tarzan movie underperformed. I think we all know why. And they don't seem to have a lot of interest in continuing or getting this stuff out there. I mean, again, Tarzan, everybody knows who Tarzan is. Everybody knows who Tarzan and Jane and all the rest of it. We all know this character. Even if you've never read the book, even if you've never seen the movie, everybody knows who Tarzan is. He's part of the cultural background of the world. I mean, the audience for Tarzan material is enormous all around the world. You would think they could make, unlike The Shadow, unlike Doc Savage, they could make an absolute fortune crowdfunding comics, get top creators to do brand new comics, you know, graphic albums, whatever, of Tarzan, of John Carter, of all the rest of them. They would have to make a bushel load of money because, like I said, Tarzan is a globally recognized figure. They still really, really like Tarzan in Europe, you know, and I don't understand why, unless they're not, unlike the lawyers at Condé Nast, they're not overseeing a whole lot of properties. They're only overseeing the properties produced by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I mean, to give you an idea of what a absolute merchandising gold mine Tarzan was, at his peak of his popularity, there were Tarzan gasoline stations. There was a chain of gasoline stations with Tarzan's image on them. There was a Tarzan Tribes of America. It was a boys club you could join, and it wasn't just through the mail. They would actually have meetings and field trips and stuff like that. And at one point, the Tarzan Tribes of America had more members than the Boy Scouts. I mean, that's how huge Tarzan was. And there's no reason why he can't be again. Shadow, Doc Savage, yeah, they're a little dated. They've got to stay in period. Tarzan, no. He's just a badass dude who hangs out with animals and has fabulous adventures with dinosaurs. I mean, come on. How hard would it be to sell this? I'd buy it. You'd buy it. Let's go. But they don't. And I don't know. I guess they're comfortable in their position and see no reason to exert themselves. David Jordan, can you tell us about the translating of Spanish comics you did for Four Winds? Moving Fortress was such a cool story with amazing art. They were actually Argentine comics. And what happened was I met Ricardo Villagrán. Starts with meeting Ricardo Villagrán because I needed an inker for Evangeline. And I really liked this guy's stuff. So I got to meet him and we hit it off. Ricardo is just a, charming guy. I've just had a lot of fun over the years in my association with Ricardo. And Ricardo once I had an association with him and he saw I was really interested in his stuff, he introduced me to all of these other Argentine artists. And eventually his brother Enrique came up to join him. And Enrique could ink just as well as Ricardo. He could ink in Ricardo's style. And a lot of times they would work together. They would sit in this little hotel room in Manhattan inking Star Trek pages, and listening to the radio. And but Enrique brought reams of Xeroxes of art by all of these fantastic Argentine artists. And I found out that a lot of my favorite European artists were actually from Argentina. Um, Whatever's in the water down there, they create some amazing guys, and amazing talents. So um, I began looking for work that we could do together, creative work. And the first thing we did together was translating some of these classic Argentine comics into English and publishing them under the Four Winds imprint. And Four Winds was a company for a brief while that belonged to Tim Truman and I. And Tim was doing original work of his own, and I wasn't translating these because I don't speak Spanish. They would provide us, Enrique would provide us with a kind of a rough English translation, and then I would make it more colloquial. Uh, so we published, 2 volumes of Alcatena work. And I agree with you, Kike Alcatena, amazing. We were the first to publish an English version of Alvar Mayer, Enrique Breccia's classic adventure story, which now is in English in its entirety from Epicenter Press in 4 really beautiful hardcover volumes. So you can read Alvar Mayer, absolute comics classic. And we did one with Juan Zanato, and I cannot remember the title of that one. But sort of a post-apocalyptic sci-fi thing. I can't remember the title of it. And from there, the relationship grew. I mean, I left Four Winds. We dissolved the partnership. Tim went on with it for a while, but it was always his baby anyway. But I continued my association with them, making deals with various independent publishers where I would write, and the Argentines would draw it. And this really blew up when the Swedish publisher Semic came to the United States looking for talent and looking for properties they could publish in their comic books, which they published all over Scandinavia, and they were part of Egmont, and Egmont published all over Europe. I think Egmont might be the biggest European comic book publisher. They were looking for IP, they were looking for material, and I was like, hey, I'll write some stuff, I'll create some stuff, and I've got these artists. And I was showing them the artists that I can use any of these guys you want. And they were like, yeah, go to it. I said, well, what are you looking for? And they told me what they were looking for. They wanted a YA thing. They like science fiction. They wanted like a police thing, everything else. So I went to town. I created The Vanishers, Time Jump War, Invasion 55, Mad Dogs, and published them all. And then I published them here, most of them through Apple. Eclipse published Mad Dogs, but most of them I published through Apple Press, a small independent publisher. I know this is more than you asked, but it's my show. Apple was a small company run out of Maryland, and so this was like a lifelong thing. And for me, working with Kike and Enrique Villagran and Jorge Zafino and all these other guys, I mean, just the dream come true. Lito Fernandez, I mean, I just loved working with these guys, and they liked my material. Their way of saying they liked my material was always the same phrase: "You have the good ideas." So it's like, okay, I want to take that as a compliment. But things like Pirate Batman and Ninja Robin and things like that, I was able to do with them. Including Winter World and many of the other properties I've gotten to work on with these absolutely fantastic artists. And at the time, for the Semic deal, I should mention the exchange rate, the dollar to the Austral, whatever the currency is in Argentina, the exchange rate was beneficial to the Argentines, and so they were able to basically cut their own prices. I wasn't setting their prices. I wasn't making these guys work at slave wages. Now, DC and Marvel were paying them their normal. They were paying them DC and Marvel rate, but Semic and Apple were paying a lower rate. That was the sales pitch. You can get Euro style comics at a discount, and the Argentines would set the price, and I was working I think $35 a page. So, and you know, the Argentines set a price that was competitive, but it was real good for them. I mean, they were doing well off of that because of the exchange rate, and we were able to produce some amazing stuff. And the Argentines were very grateful for the work in the USA because they lost all of the assignments they were doing for England. They were doing a lot of UK comics, sci-fi, and a lot of the war comics were being done by Argentines. And of course, when the Falklands War started, that ended that relationship, and they couldn't get any work in the UK. UK turned to Spanish artists in Spain, to fill the gap that the Argentines left behind. So they were desperate for work, absolutely desperate for work. Plus, their economy had collapsed. Just dreadful, dreadful. But I was glad to help out, and mostly just glad to work with them and just glad to hang out with them. I got to spend almost a month in Buenos Aires hanging out with them, made a lot of friends. Just awesome, awesomely talented guys, and dear friends as well. So I know that was a long answer to a short question, but what the heck? Twin spin. Yes, there's more from David Jordan. Could you tell us some of the best adaptations of Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff on film and in comics? Yeah, on film, no. I have a whole video about John Carter and what went wrong there. It's still it could keep me up at night if I kept thinking about it. In comics, it doesn't get better than Joe Kubert's Tarzan. When Gold Key stopped publishing Tarzan comics and DC licensed them from the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate, they assigned Joe Kubert to write and draw them. And obviously, Joe was a huge Tarzan fan because these are the most accurate, most heartfelt, most amazing adaptations of the early Tarzan novels you will find in comic form. I know a lot of great artists have worked on Tarzan. Hal Foster, Bernard Hogarth, Bob Lubbers, but wow, Kubert really got to the heart of the story, and he didn't leave anything behind. He left out all the parts everybody usually leaves out, and it's just an amazing piece of work. And of course, I love Russ Manning. Russ Manning did the Tarzan comics at Gold Key for a long time, and he also did the daily and Sunday strips of Tarzan for years. And they're wonderful. And rather than retell the Burroughs stories, Russ Manning, writing and drawing, explored all of the different worlds of Tarzan. Paludan, he goes to Pellucidar, which I always get a kick out of, and he basically creates this massive jungle fantasy epic with dinosaurs and alien creatures. I mean, just wow. And in the '70s, he started a graphic album line. It didn't go anywhere. I don't know why. I think it was Treasure House Press. You can only get them at conventions. I never saw them in a bookstore. But he did two of them. He did a great one of Tarzan at the Earth's core. Not an adaptation, but a new story. And he did a second one with Korak, which took me years to track down. But Manning, terrific stuff. Now, as far as the other properties, I've never seen a good adaptation. I've never seen a good comic book version of John Carter or Carson of Venus or Pellucidar or any of the others. Never seen one that made me happy as a Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. But if I might tootle my own horn a little bit, and I did mention this earlier, Gary Quapis and I, for 7 years, created a weekly comic strip of Pellucidar. And if you're watching this, you can see some of the examples here. And as I said, our plan was for publication. These weekly strips, you're seeing, most of the strip is here. You can see it's Sunday comic kind of thing. But Gary designed it so that we could remove the logo and then stack the Sunday strips, and they were in a European comic album format. So you would, of the, I don't know, close to 400 strips we did, you would get a 200-page graphic album telling the whole story. And boy, we had a lot of fun working on this. And I did the same thing Manning did. I explored everything I loved about Pellucidar, the Sagas, the Corapi, all these different things. And then Gary, Gary's great. I mean, we worked for years together on Conan. This was just made for us to work on. He loves drawing the creatures and the environments, and did a hell of a job coloring this. I mean, this is an amazing piece of work, and it's a shame because the only place you can read it is digitally. You can go and see it in all of its high definition glory, but you can't hold a book in your hands. And call me an old man, call me a boomer, but I like to have a book. Sorry. So anyway, if you want to read this in its entirety, all 7 years, you go over and subscribe at edgarriceburroughs.com to their comic subscription service, which is pretty reasonable. And there's dozens and dozens, every Burroughs property you can imagine. I mean, the Mad King is there. I think what's that Roman Empire epic he wrote is there. I mean, everything's there in comic book form. So you can head on over there. Joshua Ignatowski, as I live and breathe. Well, Joshua opines, previously on Ask Chuck Dixon, you've talked about how Arthur C. Clarke wrote cerebral science fiction. Now, my question to you is, what would you personally say separates cerebral science fiction from non-cerebral science fiction? Arthur C. Clarke is like the first guy I was reading science fiction, and it kind of makes you think, what if? What if there was a time machine? I mean, H.G. Wells, I mean, I'm sorry, that's thought-provoking. What if you could be invisible? What if Martians invaded? But guys like Arthur C. Clarke come along and they delve a little more into the science of what those things would be like. What's the actual, I mean, he was a bit of a realist when it came to writing this stuff. And so it's thought-provoking. It makes you wonder, makes you curious, makes you want to know more of the science behind the science fiction. And a lot of the guys coming up in the 50s were writing this way, Clarke being one of them. Frederick Paul, C.M. Kornbluth, guys like that were really starting to think of, the actual science, because with the creation of the atomic bomb, the beginnings of learning about genetics and things like that. I mean, genetics, which plays such a huge part in Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, certainly a thought-provoking book. And 1984 is basically a science fiction book. It makes you postulate what it'd be like to live under a tyranny, and is this where we're going? And Clarke's masterpiece is Childhood's End, a book I recently reread, and I remember reading it. I was probably 14 the first time I read it, and I thought it was just a hell of a story. Certainly a thought provoker, lots of surprises. Some of the biggest surprises you'll ever read in a novel are in Childhood's End. It's like, I didn't see that coming. But mostly it's what I realize now what it is. Now, I knew at the end of the book I was kind of sad, but when you're younger, you have these feelings, but you don't know why you have them. It's like, why did this book make me feel this way? Well, I'm not going to go back and examine it. I'm not at school. I'm just reading it. Reading it for entertainment, brother. I'm not going to think real hard about this stuff. That'll come when I get older. So I reread it recently, and boy, it's a dismal book about the future of mankind, where we might be going. And largely, it's written in 1953, no big surprise. It's a huge indictment of communism. It's basically a bunch of aliens come down and impose their will. We're going to make you better. We're going to cure disease and end war and everything else. But basically, they're just communists. And they're not doing it for evil purposes. I think the point of the novel is maybe it's not necessarily evil. They're basically taking the human race out of competition. So the human race just sort of fails as a species. We lose our individuality. We lose what makes us human. And none of this is an improvement. None of this is a better future. It's just a more dismal, bland, bleak future that the characters in the story don't seem, they seem vaguely aware of what's happening to them. But you as a reader, you're horrified. That's what's happening. At least that's what I take from the novel. Maybe Clark was a communist and he thought this was all a good idea. I really don't know. Now, what separates cerebral from non-cerebral? Well, you have adventure sci-fi. You have big-eyed monsters fighting, on the moon. Edgar Rice Burroughs, for the most part, is non-cerebral sci-fi. It's adventure. It's fighting and action. Star Wars. Star Wars is not thought-provoking. Star Trek is. Star Trek is thought-provoking. Star Trek dealt with it because it was written by actual science fiction writers a lot of the times. Actually presented thought-provoking ideas and make you think, hey, wow, I never really thought about it that way. And so that's the biggest difference. Now I'm going to say that I enjoy both. I wish now somebody will say there's this guy, but a lot of times the problem with cerebral science fiction is it lacks humanity. Michael Crichton wrote cerebral science fiction. And I read his stuff, but I felt it's kind of a little bit lifeless. The characters seemed just like they were created to move through the story. They didn't come alive in my mind. I didn't find them interesting as characters, but he was such a talented storyteller and his ideas were so cool and engaging that, yeah, I'd never miss a Crichton novel and I would read every one. And then something happened. All of a sudden, his characters became more real. And I found that he'd gone through a bitter divorce. Michael Crichton, as a person, this is a guy who he went to Harvard Medical School and graduated near the top of his class. He became a well-known medical professional. This is a guy who succeeded. Everything he did, he succeeded. He didn't know what failure was like. He didn't really understand how your life can be deconstructed by tragedy. And then he got this really bad divorce. And that kind of woke him up. And his characters became more believable after that. Jurassic Park, Eaters of the Dead, they're all written post-divorce. And you can really tell a difference. So that's the difference. Now, he was still writing cerebral, but now his characters are more interesting. Whereas on the non-cerebral side, it's all about making your characters interesting. Because if they're blasting xenomorphs on the planet Zuda, you want to like them. You want to be on their side and care about them. But if they're like, contemplating the nature of the universe, maybe that's not as necessary. So there you go. Twin spin. Of course, Joshua gets a twin spin. He's used to it now. He's got more twin spins than a Iranian general has medals. Okay. Joshua Yantowski says, what's your idea of a perfect day? You can't plan a perfect day. I think you can even miss a perfect day. You can, not to get too airy-fairy just before my Pilates class, but you can miss a perfect day. You can be in the middle of a perfect day and not realize it. So you really got to stop and take a look around you if things are going well and say, hey, this is a good day. Now, looking back, a perfect day can happen in a minute. I remember that a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I was doing yard work. And I'm not as young as I was. And yard work in Florida is a pain anyway. So I had cut some brush and I was loading it into the back of the truck to take to the landfill. And it was hot. I was tired. It's getting toward the end of the day. And it was Father's Day. It's Father's Day. I didn't care. Father's Day. What's Father's Day? Although my kids do give me really cool gifts on Father's Day. So I'm out there cutting up brush and everything else, sweating like crazy, and just wishing this was over. And about halfway through the job, and my youngest son comes back from church, and he's in his car, or he got dropped off. He didn't have a car at that point. He gets dropped off, and he sees what I'm doing, and he starts helping me. I didn't ask him. or anything else. He just starts helping me put that brush in the back of the truck. And now you're going to say, Chuck, he was in his church clothes. He's like a youth, what do you call it? Youth counselor or whatever. Him and a couple of other church members take care of the kids with Sunday school and all the rest of it. So he was basically dressed, to go camping. Anyway, he helped me load the rest of the truck. And I realized at that moment, this is a perfect day. This is a perfect day. And I'm glad. I'm blessed that I realized that it was a perfect day while it was happening. Not look back and go, wow, that was a great day. So there you go. A little bit of dollar store philosophy there for you. Triple spin. Joshua Ignatowski's back for more. He can't get enough. He wants to know, what's the best all-time piece of advice you've ever received in your life? It really wasn't a piece of advice. It was just something my dad said all the time. It was a little bit of hillbilly wisdom. And he would say it usually to people that he was very, very displeased with. Let's say someone had done him down on a deal or done him dirty, and he would not hesitate to confront them on it. And he would say, the person would invariably, because my dad would look like he was about to tear a telephone book in half, they would say, don't get mad. And his answer was always, I don't get mad, I get even. And I've kind of carried that with me the rest of my life. I have good friends who will go, you got screwed over by that guy. Why aren't you more angry? And it's like, what's that? That takes away from me. I'll get even someday, even if it's just by living well, even if it's just by being successful. I will get even. But you can't carry a grudge like that. Like they say, if you're going out for revenge, dig 2 graves. I mean, I don't let those people in my head. And my dad was the same way. I don't get mad, I get even. Now, put the fear of God into whoever he was saying it to at the time, because they're like, what form is this going to take? And usually, he never did anything, but he was in their head. And he would, get even by making them, go his way in the negotiation of whatever was going on, or make recompense for however they had wronged him. And, my dad wasn't a scary guy, but he could be intense. And you knew, look in his eyes, you knew he meant what he was saying. All right, Kenny Todd. I was wondering if you were a fan of Richard Corbin. You said you read heavy metal. Did you ever get the opportunity of meeting him? I never met Richard Corbin, and yes, I am a huge Richard Corbin fan. I was a Richard Corbin fan from the very first time I saw his work. First time I saw his work, 71, 72, it was in a head shop called smoke shops now, or dispensaries. It was the head shops where the hippies went, but you could get all the best rock and roll t-shirts there. So I would go to the head shop, and me, Goldwater Republican. And they started carrying underground comics, Robert Crumb, Spain Rodriguez, all those guys. I'd buy some of them because I'm into comics. And here comes this guy I never heard of, Richard Corbin. And he has this book called Rolf. And Rolf is about a sort of genetically altered German shepherd in a post-apocalyptic world. And it was like this 32-page comic. And I read it, and I read it, and I reread it, and I reread it, and I studied it. And I was like, oh man, this guy's a genius. And he is and was. He was a genius. Storytelling, the art style is his really weird art style where we go from photorealistic to like really, really cartoony. But it was okay because it all served the story. And I just had to find everything this guy had ever done. So I would haunt all of the head shops in my area in Philly and in the suburbs looking for anything by Richard Corbin. And he was pretty reliably producing stuff for, last gasp comics. And then I joined the Science Fiction Book Club because they contracted him to do book covers for some of their collections. And I was buying books I really didn't even care about just to get the Richard Corbin covers because I just dug them so much. I was ordering, he was doing prints by mail and I was ordering them. And he did anything this guy did, I was all over it. And eventually he ends up at Warren doing regular work, doing covers and interiors and color and in black and white. And just hog heaven. I'm getting a regular dose every month of Rich Corbin. And the Bat Out of Hell album, which I bought because it had a Rich Corbin cover, but I turned out I love the album. Uh, thank God it was good, but I just wanted to have that cover. So I was like a Rich Corbin freak, and everything about the guy is his he was, it was like only him and Jim Steranko were doing cinematic storytelling at the time, and that was my kind of stuff. Harvey Kurtzman type comics, where take your time, tell the story well, lay the stuff out. It's not just thought balloons and action. It's all the little moments, and make it a film on paper. And Corbin was doing all of that, and I just loved it. Absolutely loved all of his stuff. And I recently read, I bought a book of all of his Hellboy stuff, and I got to argue, I think Rich Corbin's Hellboy stuff is the best Hellboy stories of them all. And I'll bet you, if you got enough drinks in Mike Mignola, or you cornered him in an alley, he would admit the Corbin stuff are the best stories. Because I've read all of Hellboy, and the Corbin stories, without exception, are my favorites. The top 10 are all Corbin. Now, Mignola wrote them, and he has every right to be proud of them. They're terrific stories. But I think Corbin presented the character better than Mignola. Certainly more creepy. Corbin was real good at that. Real good at creepy. But yeah, heavy metal, the Warrant books, all of it. I gotta say, I never met him. The only association I had with him was I was printing T-shirts back in the day as like a side hustle, and I had a T-shirt of like a Clint Eastwood type character standing over a dead dinosaur with a smoking 45 automatic in his hand. And they really terrific art by Bob Walters, who today is a world-renowned paleo artist, if that's the term. Dinosaurs, dinosaur paintings, dinosaur murals. But at the time, he was just a friend of mine, and I said, "Could you do this?" And he just did this terrific piece of artwork of this like dinosaur-like creature that a Clint Eastwood type has just killed. And the logo above it was "It's dead, whatever it was," which is a line I stole from Thunda, a comic book Frank Frazetta did in the 50s. I always loved that line. He kills a pterodactyl, and he stands over it and says, "It's dead, whatever it was." I was like, "Oh man!" So I put that on a T-shirt. Okay, Chuck, where's this going? This is a stupid story. Rich Corbin was the first one to buy one. I got a thing in the mail from Rich Corbin, and he bought one. Also sold one to Carrie Fisher and Mr. T. and Mr. T actually appeared in a couple of interviews on Entertainment Tonight wearing his "It's dead whatever it was" T-shirt. And no, I don't have any more, and I don't know where the artwork is. Otherwise, I would have put it up here. So yeah, have I convinced you? I love Rich Corbin. Twin spin. They're growing out of the weeds today. Kenny Todd is back with final questions. Doug mentioned Paul Gulacy. Remind me of you and Scott McDaniel and Tom Grummett and Rodolfo DiMaggio. Perfect writer-artist teams. I could go on naming them. Who are some of your favorite writer-artist teams? How did you get Paul Gulacy on your Valkyrie book? Valkyrie story, absolutely wonderful book. Yeah, comics are like a marriage, and the penciler and the inker are married, the writer and the penciler are married, and you kind of get to know each other, and you're either going to hit it off or you're not. The work is going to work on its own. You're going to be on the same page. You're going to have true collaboration, or you're not. It's not going to work. But generally it works, because I think my scripts are very artist-friendly, and I've had very few complaints over the years, except from some morons who don't know how to read a script. But they were few and far between. Definitely 1%. People I work with. If you're watching this is a Rodolfo DiMaggio 2-page spread. Yeah, I mean, Flynn Henry, Graham Nolan, Sergio, Frank Fosco, guys like that, Jeff Johnson. I mean, guys like that, just, yeah, we're all working together here. We get it. We know what we're doing, and it just seems to sing on the page. And yeah, there have been any number of great writer artist teams in the past, and usually it's because they become friends and they just begin suggesting one another for assignments. And Lee and Kirby, you can't. Lee and Ditko, I got a little bit of a problem with, but Lee and Kirby would have all these nutty, crazy, insane ideas, but and they were his ideas. They weren't Lee's, so let's not get into that argument. But what Lee did bring to it was heart. Something Kirby had a hard time doing, getting you to really care about his characters. And Lee wrote some absolutely marvelous dialogue for Fantastic Four. Just some masterfully done comic book dialogue that really brought out the heart and soul of the characters that Kirby had created. And even in some cases, he adds resonance. He even adds to the stakes, because the more you care about these characters, the stakes get higher. I mean, in a story where you don't care who lives or who dies, I mean, the stakes don't matter. But when you get wrapped up in there, and then the thing is that Kirby was a student, lifelong. His curiosity was insatiable, and he learned. I mean, he read what Lee was doing, and he leaned into it. And you had, the great Johnny Storm Thing fights, Ben Grimm and his, continual battle with these superpowers he's been given, which he sees more of a curse than a blessing. All of these things Kirby leaned into. He saw where Lee was going, and he went with him, because Kirby, despite what anybody says, Kirby was a great storyteller. He was a great constructor of stories. He understood story. He understood character and everything else. He wasn't always as adept at it. Though I love all of his stuff, he wasn't always as adept. I'm not apologizing for Kirby. It's just his comics are a little bit different. There's always something a little bit off about them. But sometimes that's the coolest thing about them, is that little off something. But Lee really he brought the room together, is what he did. Another one, Joe Kubert and Bob Kanigher, their Sergeant Rock run, and Enemy Ace. And these are two guys who learn from each other. Because, like I said, I learned to write comics from reading a Kanigher script. And when I was reading the script that he gave me, all I could see was Kubert pages. It's like he understands how Kubert works, and he's giving him all the tools he needs. He understands what he likes. He's giving him the big money panel. He's given him the scene with just the clothespin people. He's given him the shot that's in silhouette. All these things that buy Kubert time so you can get the story done on time, but look awesome, that actually enhance and add to the story. So these guys, again, like Lee and Kirby, they learn from each other. They fed off each other. I think that's what a great collaboration is. You're learning about each other, you're learning from each other, and you're putting it together as if it was the product of one person. I always say the comic writer-artist is the purest form of comics, but the proper writer-artist collaboration is gold. And another great example is Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder. Will Elder and Harvey Kurtzman worked on Mad Magazine. Elder just sort of becomes, he's like the Rosetta Stone for Mad Magazine. He's what Mad Magazine was all about. He's the guy who envisions what Kurtzman had in his head from the beginning. Now, all the other guys are great. Wood, Davis, Severin, they're all great. But Elder really gets Kurtzman. And Kurtzman really digs what Elder's doing. And they just encourage each other. I can imagine these guys in a room together giggling their butts off like little schoolgirls at some of the crazy ideas they came up with. And obviously they like working together. They work together in every permutation of Harvey Kurtzman's career. When Kurtzman left Mad, Elder left with him. They did Help magazine together. They did Humbug magazine together. I think there was one other effort they made together. And eventually they get the assignment from Hugh Hefner to do Little Annie Fanny comic, full color comic that ran for years in the back of Playboy. And it's the two of them at the top of their form being very, very well paid to create these tremendous collaborations, these parodies on societal norms and pop culture and all the rest. Basically doing the Mad Magazine thing, but now in a bigger, better um, form. And you know, just a great team. These guys must have really been the closest of friends to get this kind of stuff done. And they were working together in the same building. They were in Chicago. Russ Heath told me all about it, how they shared a studio. Um, Another great team is Otto Binder and C.C. Beck. Um, if you've never read any primo Captain Marvel, I would start like 1949 and read through to the end if you can find them. There's a lot of companies that bootleg reprint these in relatively inexpensive editions. I mean, for like $60, you get like this honking big 300-page book of Captain Marvel, and reproduced from the comics. Just basically scanned. Anyway, the two of these guys must have had fun working together as well. Because Binder would come with these crazy ideas. Kurt Schaffenberger worked on stuff as well, but Binder would come with these great ideas, and Beck would draw them. And if you've never read this era of Captain Marvel, you need to treat yourself, because they really are a lot of fun. Just a lot of fun, like these tongue-in-cheek adventures, but with rising stakes and some interesting science fiction elements, and just fun stuff. They're comics that didn't take themselves terribly seriously, and that's part of the charm of them. But they're not talking down to kids. They don't pander to kids at all. They're actually pretty sophisticated in the storytelling area. Otto Binder realized that kids are a tough audience, and you have to keep their attention. And once you've got their attention, you can do some wild stuff. And Binder and Beck did some amazing stuff together. Really enjoy these comics. Now, you asked about Paul Gulacy. How did Paul Gulacy wind up on Valkyrie? Well, I was doing Airboy and Valkyrie for Eclipse, and they asked if I wanted to do a spin-off miniseries. I said, yeah, I'd love it. This character's terrific. I love Valkyrie. And Dean said I might be able to get Paul Gulacy. Why? Because he and Dean had a working relationship. The very first graphic novel ever published in the United States was Saber, with artwork by Paul Gulacy. And apparently over the years, Gulacy made quite a bit of money off that book, because it sold like gangbusters for years and years and years. So, if they asked, if Dean asked, Paul was ready to work. And so that's how we got together. Now, funny story, if you said you read it, if you remember the scene at the end where Valkyrie is, all the adventure's over, and big surprise, she survives and triumphs, and she's flying home, commercial, and which I thought was a funny idea. And she's looking out the window, and she sees Airboy, she sees Davy Nelson in the clouds, and she's thinking about getting back home to the man she loves. In the original artwork, Paul, instead of drawing Airboy in the clouds, drew the Three Stooges. I still don't know why. Maybe just to make Dean laugh. I don't know. But Dean called me immediately and told me, yeah, he drew the Three Stooges in the clouds. Like, this is who Val's waiting to get home to. So, funny, two Stooges references in one video. So rather than trouble Paul with redrawing it, they took Paul's Airboy image from Airboy cover, and they put it in there. So, and then years later, of course, I got to work with Paul quite a bit on G.I. Joe Special Missions, and we had a lot of fun working on that. Good stuff. How do we get here? We shouldn't have. Where's the question? It's really weird. I keep losing this question. The question was what's the weirdest crossover you've ever seen? Like, now I can't remember who it was from. What's the weirdest crossover you've ever seen Batman involved with? And let me see if I can find. No, I can't. That question is like gone. Hold on. No, it's gone. And I've just spoiled my next one. Anyway, yeah, the craziest one, and I just became aware of this literally 2 days ago. Batman Elmer Fudd. That's the strangest one I've ever seen. That's pretty weird. I didn't even want to look at it. Well, it was sealed in plastic. I saw it at a new Barnes and Noble that opened near me. And I just thought, man, this is Weird. And even weirder, it's got art by Lee Weeks. You know, I don't know. What were they thinking? Maybe it's a work of genius. I have no idea. It might be the most wonderful comic ever produced, but I don't think I'll ever know. But it made me sad, just the idea of Lee Weeks working on Batman Elmer Fudd. Now, maybe Lee had the time of his life. Maybe he's a big Fudd fan. I don't know. I don't get it. If you were going to do this, why wouldn't you do it in the animated style? Things like this baffle me. Who thought of this? What genius thought this was a good idea for a crossover, but rejected Dick Tracy Batman? Like, oh God, I don't know. But whatever you might say about Elmer Fudd and Batman together, it can't possibly be as bad as The Punisher meets Archie. Boy, that one pissed me off. When I saw that announced, because at this time I was like a year and a half of trying to get a Batman Punisher crossover together. And I saw this solicited, and I called Don Daly immediately, and I said, what the hell? You know, the first crossover Frank Castle has is with the gang from Riverdale. I mean, come on. And he's like, oh, I thought it would be a good idea. I thought it'd be funny. And it's not. And then it's Archie artwork by the Archie team. You know, nothing wrong with that. And all the Punishers are drawn by John Buscema. I mean, it's just, wow. I know why he never mentioned it to me. Because he knew my reaction would be. Oh, Hippopotamus 1. While on the subject of crossovers, boy, how did you know we were on the subject of crossovers? I know in a previous video you said you enjoyed them quite a bit. What's the most absurd? There you go. What's the most insane one you've ever seen featuring Batman specifically? Insane can be good or bad, of course, in the context of the question. Anyway, basically just the most wild idea someone had featuring Batman and some other IP you wouldn't normally associate with Batman. How did I lose that silly question? Well, at least you got credit, Hippopotamus 1. Mr. Entertainment, he submits, with the exception of Nightfall, I believe, why do you choose to not include thought balloons in any other of your superhero works? I don't generally include thought balloons in any work, superhero or otherwise. I see the reasoning for it in the past. When I was a kid, I thought that they overdid it. You know, Daredevil's fighting Stiltman and he's falling 20 stories possibly to his death. And he's got 18 thought balloons following him the whole way down. And I'm like, wow, he thinks really fast. He thinks faster than 13 feet per second. He's faster than terminal velocity, this guy's head. And thinking about how he's going to land and he's going to do this. And, you know, what's Karen doing? And, you know, I thought it was too much. So when I went to write the things, I only used thought balloons for comedic purposes. If I was writing Simpsons or SpongeBob, or even a comedic sequence in a dramatic comic, if there's like a little bit of a humor and a thought balloon would be funny, I'll throw it in. But generally, I stay away from them. I prefer, like when I was doing Robin, I mean, Robin is very much, I used Ditko's Spider-Man as a template for it. But I wasn't going to have Robin have thought balloons, so I have the first-person narration to replace the thought balloons. So you're getting all of that, but generally in a more terse form, because it's not just his stream of conscious thoughts we're reading; it's something he's put down in writing and put some thought behind. So it's not like immediate. But it is giving you somewhat of an inner dialogue for him. Thought balloons had their day, in my opinion. So, Jason Manning, having read Hunter Ninja Bear, I was surprised to learn of a real-life Sankabetsu brown bear incident that took place in Hokkaido in 1915, in which a bear killed 7 people in a series of attacks in a remote village. Were you aware of this when you wrote the book? And if so, did it inform your story in any way? No, the Finocchio brothers, they came up with the storyline for Hunter Ninja Bear. Now, maybe they knew about this incident. I didn't. And I've seen representations of this now, and it was a different kind of bear. It's really weird. If neither the brothers or I ever heard of this, it's a hell of a coincidence that we came up with it, because I've seen representations of what this bear looked like, and it's a species that is currently extinct in Japan, possibly hunted to extinction in the same way the bears in Hunter Ninja Bear were hunted to extinction. There are bears native to Japan, and I certainly wouldn't go up and hug one, but they aren't as large, and they aren't as ferocious, and they aren't as considered as dangerous as apparently this breed of bears was. And they commemorate this at the location. In Japan, you can go visit a representation of the village and this 3D recreation of the event, and that's a big bear. The bears, if it's anywhere near the size, and pictures I've seen of it, paintings and things like that made of it at the time, this was not the cuddly bears that they have in Japan now with the little white, they're black with a little white stripe down their chest. Apparently this is a brown bear. It was sizable, maybe not the size of a Kodiak, certainly the size of an American brown bear or an American black bear, which are big enough, trust me. Yeah, I had no idea. I looked this up, obviously, to get these images. That's fascinating. So I got to ask Tom next time I talk to him, did you guys know about this? And but they included all of these historical references in the outline they gave me, the treatment they gave me. So I can't imagine if they knew about this 1915 bear attack, they wouldn't have included it in the materials, because I got a wealth of historical materials. They did a lot of the heavy lifting on the research for this, for Hunter Ninja Bear. So yeah, that's weird, isn't it? Who knew? Who knew? Life imitates art, or art imitates life. I don't know which one. Yeah, art imitates life unknowingly. Very strange. Hey, something big. All 4 volumes are out. Me and Frank Fosco. People are saying really nice stuff about this. Andrew Paquette really loved it. Wrote a whole review just praising it to the high heavens. If you don't know what Something Big is, it is a science fiction story about an alien invasion, but with a twist, because it's a heist story. 30 years after the invasion, Larry Dorfman and a gang of kids raid an alien hive to steal a fortune in gold. And there's all kinds of complications, all kinds of mysteries, all kinds of great reveals. And you can buy all 4 oversized, European style albums at Amazon. It's available now. And I think you'll dig it. Frank and I had a blast working on it. And actually, we're talking about a prequel. We're seriously, as serious as we get, discussing a prequel possibly. Now remember, brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. If you have a question as good or better than one of the questions that asked today, because I get some awesome questions, you contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. Most reliable way of reaching me on any kind of business you might have. That's it. That's it for this week. Regrettably, I will. Thanks for liking, subscribing, sharing. Thanks for the questions. You guys are terrific. And I'll see all of you down the road.